by the way. To think that one of the churches that we admire most was right here. And all that we find in that letter to the Philippians, a great call to unity, a great call to one another relationships that would be such a high charge, and an absolute lordship of Jesus in the face of intense suffering. And that suffering was even regarded as a great honor to all of those Christians that were together with Paul in Philippi. We will take a look at some of the portions of the letter to the Philippians, as well as some of the background that makes some of that letter make a bit more sense now that we're here. So, all right, so a bit of background. As we mentioned, that hill that is right over there, I mean, just a few clicks away, is the site of the last of the great Civil War battles. But in fact, it's quite interesting in that it wasn't just one final battle. It was like there was a final four and then the finals. And the final four are some very famous names for us English speakers because we know Shakespeare. And we know Brutus and Cassius. We know, of course, Mark Antony. And then Octavian is thrown into that mix as well. And so the final four were Octavian and Antony versus Cassius and Brutus. And in 42 BC, the great battle took place just on that field over there. And as we just mentioned, because of the marshy land, we saw the prevailing of Octavian and Mark Antony. And that was, all quite encouraging. And many of the soldiers had already been awarded great Roman citizenship, which is a big deal, a massive deal we'll talk about. And they had also been awarded landed gentry status in Italy, like in the promised land, so to speak, of any Roman veteran. However, there was a bit of a falling out between Antony and Octavian. And within 11 years, so by now we're looking at 32 BC, 31, 32 BC, Antony and Octavian went to war with one another. Another civil war. And it also took place here. And the forces of Antony at this time were then vanquished, but they had already come to a place of thinking they would have received honor. Now they're the defeated insurrectionists against the great Augustus Caesar. He isn't that yet. Now, that would place those soldiers in a rather condemned position. But here's what happened instead. Instead of them either being imprisoned or enslaved or vanquished or expelled or whatever it might have been, instead, they were granted great lands right here. And this colony from those soldiers was populated, and then this colony of Philippi, renamed in Augustus's honor, was then established as an actual Roman colony, which is a big deal, one of a great honor that you could have. There aren't many Roman colonies. And then on top of that, those soldiers, instead of being punished, were given status as Roman citizens with land in a Roman colony. That would have been one of the classic examples that Seneca and Cicero would point to of caudice, or grace, in the Roman colony. Now, for us, that's a very important idea because we hear the word grace and we try to make sense of it. And how many of us haven't wrestled with the idea of, I want to be motivated by grace? But yet we often feel ourselves maybe, anemic at the end of that exercise, thinking, where's the punch of grace that's going to help me there? And the evangelical world is no help because the best that they can do with grace is just make it a credit card with a higher and higher balance. And more tear-jerking stories about even that was what was forgiven. Again, at some point in time, you think, I think I might take advantage of a system like that. But not so to the Roman colony. And interestingly, if you were to do a search of the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, to look for a better understanding of caudice, you would actually fall a little bit short in that too, because almost all of the 70 some odd uses of caudice in the Old Testament are in an idiom. And the idiom is, he found favor in his eyes. She found favor in his eyes. So it was just always used in that way to say that you were regarded closely, or you became a friend, or you even had special status. but it isn't the richness and the depth and the breadth of charis as we see it in the New Testament. It would only be, again, idiomatically used. So if we come away with thinking, well, maybe Paul could have gotten this from the Old Testament, maybe in fact he began to use charis, especially to Roman colonies in his letters, where the word grace or charis was already rich in meaning.
Right.
No more rich than right here. This is a colony built on grace. This is a settlement of charis right here.
Yep.
Really astounding. And when Seneca and Cicero explain the use of this in the Roman colony, they explain it by pointing towards the statue of the three graces, or for them, it wasn't just a statue, the three graces, as they understood it, which were three elegant, graceful ladies in a dance, one with another. And for them, they needed to have three to explain it, because in any transaction of grace in a Roman colony, there was the initial offering, a free will offering of grace. Octavian to the veterans. He, out of the beneficence of himself, gives grace. He was a benevolent patron that gave grace. Now, the dance doesn't just end with one giver giving a gift. The second portion of this dance, as it continues, is the reception of the gift. And this is very important in a shame-honor society. As a matter of fact, Cicero and Seneca both point to the idea that there are a lot of laws for a lot of things in the Roman colony. One thing that they said we do not need a law for is for the dance of grace to continue. Why? Because the expectations were so ingrained into the culture. It was the fabric of loyalty that brought the community together, that for anyone to receive charis without gratitude, or as we call Thanksgiving, Eucharist, right? Where we know the word Eucharist, which is just simply the idea of being thankful. So the second aspect of it that those veterans, I'm sure, would have exuded was Eucharisto, or and to say thank you here, it would be Eucharisto. It's a kind of a bit of a corruption of that phrase. But nonetheless, they would have had to have received it with Eucharist. And then to complete the dance and to continue to dance, because the dance is never over, but to continue the dance is then a reciprocal, proportional, obligatory return of that grace.
Right.
Reciprocal, proportional, obligatory. Now, people don't like those words associated with grace, but that was the depth of the understanding of grace in a Roman colony. And God forbid that you received it with entitlement, or that you received it with some sort of a thoughtlessness or laziness, where there was never any thought then of being able to then return the favor and be able to proclaim the greatness of that who gave it to you. Now, what this did then for Philippi is it created one of the most fiercely loyal, patriotic Roman colonies that there was. And any Roman colony was basically an outpost of Rome. As a matter of fact, this place, as we look at the streets, the Ignatia Via, the roads, the dress, they wore the Roman toga. They wore the Roman dress. They used the Roman laws. They actually used as a model for the city layout, Rome itself. Everything here was all about paying homage to the imperial cult. We'll use that term a lot, the imperial cult. That was the worship. And there are actually scattered throughout here evidences of worship of Octavian, Julius, and Claudius Caesar. And why is that? Because that was part of the dance of grace. That if you had nothing else to give, well, then at least you could make your benefactor famous.
Yeah, right.
And you would proclaim with boldness the greatness which has been bestowed upon you by that benefactor. And everything that you did was motivated out of this dance of grace. But then every time that you returned the favor to any benefactor in a Roman society, that only then strengthened the relationship and made you deeper and deeper in a wonderful, ever intimate dance of grace one with another. So now Paul enters in, Paul comes up the Ignatian way, comes right into here, and this is what he encounters. And so what does he use to be able to communicate to them? Charis. Charis in every facet of it. But now he's coming to them to let them know, interestingly, that there is a new Lord and Savior. Right. The two words that were used of Octavian. And of course, when you have the imperial cult providing you peace, which is very important for people that have experienced civil war to the degree that they had, and providing you relief in times of famine. It was the emperor who would rally to be able to get together the relief for whatever the contingent circumstances may have been. But when you have all of that, they began to replace the gods. And who needs the rest of the pantheon of gods if you actually have the emperors who are doing those very things? Now, Rome, interestingly, received well enough any god that came in. They synthesized it all, because that's the way that they were able to administer such a far-flung, widespread empire, is to let them have their gods, as long as they know where their bread is really buttered. And that is on Rome itself. And so when Paul comes in here, and he basically thumbs his nose at Octavian, that was quite an uphill climb that he probably had to go after to be able to pull that off. But my goodness, does he ever. But what was the great patriotic test of the Roman Empire? Caesar is Lord. Right. Kaiser Kyrios, rather than Jesus is Lord. And what is the hallmark of Paul's letter? What is the greatness of this letter to the Philippians if it's not the hymn, the great Christological hymn of Philippians chapter 2? Take a look at that with me right now. And here we have the beauty of this hymn. I'll read it from the NIV. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, emptied himself, by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. That's the depth of it. And then look at the parabola, the grand parabola. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place, gave him the name that is above every name, including Octavian, Claudius, Julius. Right. That at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow. Imagine hearing this here. In heaven and on earth and under the earth. And, here's the big one, every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the Father. Yeah. Boom. That's what he laid down here, is that there is a new sheriff in town, there's a new king in town, and his name is Jesus Christ. Yeah. Philippi, I get that you are founded because of some great gratitude, but you need to marshal all of your understanding of that dance of grace and to recognize that there is one so much greater, a name so much higher, one so much more exalted. Why? Because he emptied himself for you. He wasn't just a benefactor who bestowed gifts to you, but he is the one who emptied himself for you. Right. He is the one who was defeated in battle for your sake. He was the one that was forsaken so that you might be acknowledged. He is the one that was shamed so that you could walk these streets with honor. And then, by the way, if you all are shamed in any way for being a Christian, let that be your badge of honor, knowing that you are sharing in the very same sufferings of the greatness of Christ. And that goes back to, just a little way before this, chapter 1, verse 27. Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. I'll switch over to the ESV for a minute here. Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. Now, all of that doesn't come close in the English to conveying the essence of what Paul was redirecting. What he says to them is, polituo is the Greek word. We've heard it a lot, even on this bus trip so far. Polis is the word for society, community, the civilization, the civic center of it all. Basically what he is saying here is not just, hey, live a good life. No, he's saying communally, Christians in Philippi, you are now a new polis. just as Philippi is the ultimate expression of the outpost of Rome as a polis. We have a Minneapolis, we have an Annapolis, an Indianapolis, right? We have this word used even in English language. We get the word politics from all of that. Not a good example what that conjures to mind. But what it does conjure to mind to them is not politics. But no, what polis conjures to them is side-by-side patriotism, right? One to another. It would be conveyed in what he says right after this. So that I may hear that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, not frightened at anything by your opponents, a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. And then he throws down the charis right after this. It says, for it has been granted to you. What is that word there? Charizomai. For it has been graced to you. Right. Graced to you. For what? That for your sake, that for the sake of Christ, that you should not only be able to trust in him, to believe in him, but it's also your gift to suffer for his sake, because you are engaged in the same conflict that you saw that I had, and now hear that I still have. It is actually part of the expression of Eucharisto, having been receiving a charis on your part, that now the greatness of your life is that you no longer live insignificant lives. You are citizens of a greater kingdom. Chapter 3, verse 20, your citizenship is a greater citizenship that Paul then conveys. This book has more prefixes with S-U-N or S-Y-N, soon, in it, than pound for pound than anywhere else. As a matter of fact, I think there's even one section here. If you look over to chapter 4, I believe it's verse 13.
Come on, Ed.
Oh, it's not.
Come on.
Come on, Ed.
Come on, Ed.
But where he says again and again of this togetherness that we have, he says, yes, verse 3. Yes, I ask you also, true companion. That's the word Suzugus. Help these women who have labored side by side, who have labored together, again, with me in the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers. All of those words that I just said are all words that have the same prefix to them. What is that prefix? It's the prefix of community, the prefix of one anotherism. Why? Because this is the characterization of Philippi as a city. He's taking all of that great strength and now applying it to the church. And basically what he is saying is that the great strength of this city will then come down on your head. Because what happened, they'll say to you? You once were so characterized by charis. Are you now desecrating the charis that was given to you? Are you breaking the cycle of this dance? And Paul says, yes, you are. You are. You've broken. It's no longer Octavian is Lord. You're not reciprocally obligatory and proportionally making him more famous by the gratitude of what you've received. You're doing that now for Jesus, because one greater than Octavian is here. This is a very powerful idea to be able to see that their lives were then able to really huddle together in the face of a unified front, all coming down upon them. Civic, social, cultural pressure to conform again to the dance of the three graces of this community. But Paul is saying, no, conform to the dance of the three graces, but the grace of Jesus Christ. Right. Let that be the new strengthening that you have to show them that there is something greater now for which you live. And that there is now not a Caesar is Lord understanding of everything as life's circumstances occur around you, but from now on, it is a Jesus is Lord understanding.